So the topic I want to talk about today is how to breathe in a handstand. Not necessarily how to, but just some of the theory behind it. I think it's a topic that often goes overlooked because a lot of people do just eventually figure it out after they've been doing the skills a certain number of times. I know for me personally in my own practice, it's not something I really had issues with or I really had to think about until I started teaching more. And then of course, once you start teaching adults, you have to break down a lot of aspects that you didn't really have to think too much about. So the idea of breathing in a handstand is very important because, as I explained in other videos, it is a resting position. Handstand is not something you should be working very hard in, and breath control is a very big part of that. So basically, if you don't learn how to breathe relaxed and properly, you won't ever be able to hold the handstand for a very long time, and then you won't ever be able to rest in the handstand, which of course makes it much more difficult to later go on to more advanced skills. So the first topic to think about is, why don't people breathe in a handstand? Why do people breathe under tension, or why do they hold their breath? And there's a few reasons. One, of course, could be fear. People are going into inversion. They're going into situations that they're not comfortable with. And sometimes you get panic breathing that sits in. Sometimes you get the breath holds as a fear response. So in that case, getting more comfortable with the position is going to help. A lot of psychological relaxation, and then of course learning how to bail out, which I do talk about in a previous video as well. The second reason why people might breathe through strain is that because they don't understand the handstand as a resting position yet, so they have to create a lot of tension in their body to hold the handstand, or they think they do. And of course, when they're holding a lot of tension, naturally it's going to restrict a little bit of their breathing. So there's more issues than that, but those are kind of two main ones, why people wouldn't breathe or why people wouldn't breathe well. And then as far as technique of breathing in the handstand, it is a little bit different than what you would teach standing, only because of the demands of the skill. So again, this is just one of those things that I didn't really have to think about, and then once I started breaking it down, it does make a lot of sense. So if you are one of those people who just hasn't gotten it yet, this could be really useful. Or if you just like to geek out about all the different biological processes we go into when we're learning physical skills, I think it is pretty interesting. And as usual, take my advice with a grain of salt. This is what I found that I do. This is what in my teaching experience I found works for me and works for other people. It is not by any means the only method. This is just one way that I like to explain it. So I don't want to go into the full details of breathing in general because I think there's a lot of information out there much better than what I can explain it. So I'm just going to generalize it in a much more simplified approach than what it really is. So you can breathe by expanding your chest. You can breathe by expanding your stomach. See from the side. You can breathe by expanding your chest and your stomach. So in general, it's going to be a full expansion of the lungs. And this distinction is very important because in the handstand, you won't be able to get that full extension. So what's happening in the handstand, right? What position are we in? We're going to be shoulders open. Not all of us, of course, but the ideal handstand position is what we're going to be working with, and that's going to be the straight line. So you have your shoulders open and you have your ribs in. So when you have your ribs in, that is a bit of contraction in the chest, which means that if you were to breathe through the chest, you would lose that contraction of the ribs that you have holding your back flat and holding your form in place. So the difference between breathing in the handstand and breathing standing up is that you're going to have to isolate the breath to only the stomach, and it's going to be a little bit more of a shallow breath. So this is something to practice before you get upside down, to pull the ribs in as if you were in a handstand, and if you want to do it with your arms overhead, you can. But the idea is to isolate the stomach breath. You can breathe only through the nose, you can breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. All of those are fine, but the idea is to be able to isolate the breathing to this section of your body, because I'll show you later when I expand the chest, I lose the form, and the whole idea is to keep the form, so you have to breathe in a way that allows for that. If you read the old Pavel Tsatsouline books, he talks about breathing behind the shield, where you maintain the tension, but you're still breathing. It's not the same as that, because I'm not really in a high tension position, but it is a very similar concept, where you're in your handstand position, you're breathing only through your stomach. It's going to be a much more shallow breath than what you would do standing up, and it is because the position is restricted. And then the other idea is that you don't want to stop breathing, so you want to keep the flow continuous. And one other thing I try to keep in mind, and it's not really a breathing technique necessarily, but it's usually a marker for good relaxed breathing, is that if somebody can hold a conversation in a handstand without any strain in their voice, that is usually a sign that they're relaxed and that they're breathing well. So best way to practice breathing initially is not to worry about the handstand balance, but just to get up on the wall and focus on these different breathing techniques, focus on holding the position. It's going to take time, you're going to have to acclimate, and as I mentioned in the beginning, fear is a big part of it, so it's going to be more difficult to breathe until you acclimate to the fear of inversion. But of course, it's the reverse of that as well. Sometimes breathing will help speed up the acclimation to the fear of inversion. Learning how to relax your body in a way that you're not producing too much tension. So of course, if I'm tensing up, it's going to be more difficult to breathe in. Certain positions are more difficult to breathe in. So this technique applies more for a straight line handstand or something similar to that. If I'm in a planche, for example, it's going to be more difficult to breathe just because of the tension I have to generate in my body. Same thing goes for handstand positions like maybe contortion handstands, or if you go into Mexican handstand or flags or side bends. Anything like that will also be a little bit more difficult to breathe in just because the midsection is being compressed, so you don't have the same amount of space. But those are also not, they're resting positions, or they can be if you do them well enough, but it's not the same idea of a resting position as a vertical line, because in those positions you're not stacked on your joints like you are when you're straight up and down. So it's a technique to try to practice. Again, it's maybe you've never had to deal with it because you figured it out, but I know that in my experience of teaching adults and teaching workshops, a lot of people don't or haven't figured it out, and sometimes it's worth to say it because that can help make that connection. It can help make it click for certain people. A little bit of a practical demonstration. I'll show you what it's like when I'm breathing normally in a handstand, and then I'll show you what the difference is when I try to breathe through the chest, and then it can help to understand why we use this breathing technique that we do and why I explain it this way. So, first handstand of the day. Not really warm. Oh, okay, so this is going to be my regular handstand. You can see I'm trying to... You can see my stomach moving, hopefully. And my chest is not. Now look what happens when I breathe through my chest. So I'll show you another example of that, but you can see that when I fully expanded my lungs using my chest as opposed to only my stomach, my back ended up arching to compensate for the space that I created by opening my chest. So if I fully breathe in that way, it's going to be more difficult to hold my form, and then of course it's going to be more difficult to continue the handstand. So I'll show you that one more time. Go into the handstand, I breathe. As opposed to the stomach breath. And when I do the stomach breath, it allows me to hold my form. And notice that, of course, I can still talk in the handstand, so I'm still in a resting position when I'm there. You know, kind of a subtle detail today, but hopefully you found it helpful. And if you do, feel free to like, share, subscribe. I'll put some links down below if you want to support my work. I have a bunch of Vimeo instructional videos. I actually just put out a new wrist sequence fairly recently. So it's an update of the previous one, just with a much better production quality. I have workshops coming out all over the world, and you can check my website for that. So as always, thank you for the support. Let me know what else you'd like to see, and I'll do my best to try to get it up here every so often. And I'll see you guys next time.